I think the biggest takeaway, it's pretty simple, and it's that your website is no longer the front door of the medical practice. It's now the search engine or Google. Consider your website more like the back office. And the thing is, if your strategy doesn't command attention on the search results page itself, you're now invisible to about 68% of the market. Welcome to the Dr. Marketing Tips Show. I am Jennifer.
And I'm Corey. And before we jump into today's topic, Jen, I wanted to ask you a question here. So if a patient searches for a medical specialty on Google, right, and gets their answer and never actually clicks to the website, does that search still count as a win for your practice?
I sure hope so, because there's some new data that just dropped, and those are the only kinds of searches that are actually growing. We're looking at a brand new 2026 data from SparkToro and SimilarWeb, which reveals a pretty staggering statistic. That's 68% of all Google searches in the US now end without a single click to an external website.
Yeah, which is crazy. That's actually something that I've been talking about with clients recently. We're always looking at dashboards. We're always paying attention to the numbers. And the one thing that we're starting to see is the overall number of traffic is starting to go down. And this kind of backs up that and gives it some, I think, really sound reasoning. It's because it's essentially saying nearly 7 out of 10 searches are ending with this 0-click idea, which basically just means that someone is getting what they need, they're getting the answer, and then there's no reason to continue to click to your website. Because if you're using the Google AI mode or Gemini, or really any of these other search engines that are out there, this 7.5 percentage point jump is, and that's just from 2 years ago. So just from a couple of years ago, this big jump is basically saying that search engines, AI, is looking at your website, filtering your data up into either an AI overview or an answer, and then whether you're cited or not, patients are not clicking through. So these patients are researching symptoms or they're checking treatments or whatever they're doing, but they're saying completely inside of either Google's ecosystem or whatever the chat ecosystem is.
And exactly. And it's not just the clicks like to your website that are disappearing, but the share of searches generating any kind of click, whether it's organic, paid, or even like the maps function or your directory listing function. These have all dropped almost 10% between 24 and where we are today in 26. Like, the numbers are just going, if you're looking at the trend data, they're all trending in the wrong direction for those of us that pay attention to these numbers from a marketing perspective.
Yeah, which is interesting because, again, Google specifically, I mean, their whole business is built on ads. So to see that the ad numbers is also going down is crazy. And these clicks, Google is training them to kind of stay in almost this search loop, according to this study, where the data shows that the searches leading to another Google search jumped by 7 percentage points or so. So essentially what's happening then is, instead of going to the website, they're just asking another question to AI or to Gemini, to whatever, and then again, getting their answer and then leaving.
And look, the elephant in the room is it's AI that's driving all of this. And it's those, going from being a search engine to kind of this answer engine, because your AI overviews are appearing in more than, according to the data, appearing in more than 20% of Google searches. I would say that number is probably pretty low.
Mm-hmm.
Even in the time that they put the data out to today, I can't imagine going to Google and putting anything in where it's not just going to give me the AI overview back at this point. And this is the kind of stuff that every healthcare marketer needs to be paying attention to, because when those AI searches are appearing at the top of the page for Google, click-through rates are dropping by roughly 60%, and that's how we've been measuring success for years. And these measurements are now just vanity metrics, which funny, because every CEO of every large practice drives me crazy asking for proof in the pudding that these clicks are actually doing something. And I think now that we really do have to hang our hat on the data that's driving patients and not just clicks to the website.
Yeah, you need to pay attention to what's driving revenue or patient volume instead of overall organic search traffic, which is something that most every marketer pays attention to or reports on. And you're seeing, like the data says, a 60% drop in that, which is staggering, but also not surprising, because if you think of just the way that the search works, you get your answer. Why would you check your sources or click through to something else? Because you got what you needed, so you're on to the next thing. It really feels like the snowball is picking up speed. And we talked about this in a recent episode that we just did, but we're recording this on June 10th, 2026. Google just held Google I/O for 26 a couple weeks ago, and they mentioned that AI mode has cleared over 1 billion monthly users, and that the query volume within AI mode is doubling every quarter. So just think about what that does to your searches.
Well, it's a rapid shift. If you look at the history back in 2019, it was roughly 49% of searches were zero click. In 2020, that number hit 64%. In 2024, it hovered around 58%. And now in 2026, we're pushing 70%. It's 68 and change, but we're pushing 70% of all searches are zero click to your website. So it really does have to start shifting the mindset as it relates to your healthcare marketing.
And again, just kind of backing up so everyone knows what we're talking about. If a patient wants to know an answer to something, they're going to want this immediate gratification. For example, if they're searching like, what causes sudden knee swelling? So the Google AI overview is going to give that answer to them in 5 seconds. It's going to run a bunch of searches, filter that content up from, let's say, a dozen different websites. Maybe your website's one of those, so you win that, which is great. But then they got the answer that they needed. They're going to close the app. They're never going to go to your clinic's page. They're never going to see your call to action to book an appointment or whatever, because they just wanted to know what caused the knee swelling. And now they're going to go, they're going to go rest and use the ice method and go from there. Okay, one thing to note is that this data actually excludes Google mobile search, but Google mobile search is probably even higher. So 70 to 80% of these patient searches happen on a phone. So again, if people are looking on their mobile device and the overview showing up, they're even less likely to click through to your clinic site.
Yeah, and just the way that we find things has changed so much over the years. All of us are starting to use Google or whatever your search engine or your answer engine is a little bit different. And, I know it sounds bleak, but before you go out there and fire your agency, let's all take a deep breath, because traditional SEO is not dead. Just like traditional marketing is not dead, but our roles are changing. According to the research, there's actually some specific categories pretty insulated from this. So Corey, why don't you tell us what those safe zones are?
Yeah, so a couple of different things. One is the branded search. That's so if a patient actually knows your practice name or knows a provider at your practice. So if they're searching for a specific doctor's name, for example, they're still most likely going to click through to see that bio page or whatever the case may be to get to, maybe a location page. What we're also seeing is the local business query. Those are still winning. So we've been talking about this for a long time, but that's basically your Google business profile, making sure that that is as accurate and up to date as possible. Because, for example, searches like urgent care near me or open now, even if they're not clicking on your website, that is someone with a high intent on converting, and they're going to either the Google Map Pack or they're looking at business listings real quick, and they're clicking on phone numbers or directions. Sometimes they'll click on the clinic website too, but they're still, they are potential patients that are ready to convert in that moment. And then there's always the high intent transactional searches. So queries like book online for a vein consultation or LASIK surgery pricing, those kinds of things. Even if those results are showing up in an AI overview, the data kind of says that people, because those are higher ticket items or there's an additional action that needs to be taken, that they're still actually clicking through and doing a little bit more research there. So those patients are ready to book, but AI at the moment cannot substitute that interaction yet. That's coming. And there's promise of, for example, Google building an assistant that you can say, I want to book this vein consultation. Then it will run out and say, here's a couple of practices. You want me to go ahead and book you for Tuesday at 8:30. I'm going to have a hard time trusting that. How do you know it's actually going to pick the right practice? What provider is going to pick? Is it going to get your address right? And there's just so many things that could go wrong with that. So I think healthcare is going to be late to that game, but those agents are coming. And the example that Google used in their I/O presentation and that everyone always talks about for whatever reason is travel. So I'm assuming travel's happening first, where you could say I want to go to, I don't know, Sedona for the weekend, book my itinerary, and then the AI agent will run out, book a flight, get a rent-a-car, book a hotel, and set you up with, say, these are the things you're supposed to do. Again, I have a hard time trusting that because there's just so many variables there, but that's what all these big tech companies are talking about. So that's coming.
That's where it's headed. I was at a conference recently and they were talking about very similar things about, not healthcare, but just in general, like choosing a plumber or a handyman to come out to the house or something like that. Just saying that is going to be the case, and how important it is now to open up some things on your website that typically we hadn't opened up before. We gated them, but now they don't want you gating so that we can be ready for the answer engines. So if nearly 70% of people aren't clicking when you show up at the top, how do we as practices, how do we pivot? I would think that it has to be all about being able to influence on the platform itself, but how do we make that pivot if everything we've worked towards is that click and now that click's not happening?
Yeah. So it kind of comes down to something that we say all the time, and that's sort of meeting people where they are. So, in the past it was, well, we want to optimize for this click and we want to show up really high on the search engines because that's what's driving patient volume. And that's how we're going to get there. The data is saying that you still need that foundation because that foundation is how you're going to kind of win this AI referral. So Google AI is going to generate this overview. It includes these small link cards. So if you optimize your content so Google's AI can select your practice as the authoritative source, which really is just, all of the best practices from SEO we've talked about forever. You might lose that general search click, but you're going to win that validation. You're still going to be kind of seen as the authority. So that's one thing. And that also, lets you know that all this work you've done for all this time doesn't go to waste. The other thing is to optimize for this 0-click conversion. So this is how people are going to search. You may show up in these cards. That's what we just talked about. But you now have to optimize for this 0-click idea, which is essentially making sure that your Google business profile is flawless or as close to flawless as it can be. You want to list every service. You want to add pricing. You want to add a link to actually book an appointment if you can. Post updates directly to Google, because that way, if they can convert without actually leaving Google, that's going to do a couple things. One, that's ecom 101. Less clicks means less friction, means more people are likely to book. And Google likes that because you're keeping them on their platform. So everything that you can do there is going to benefit you in the long run. I was actually just looking at something a couple of days ago where talking specifically about posting direct updates to your Google business profile. And you should be doing that twice a week, which it's just like another thing to add to the list. But if we're meeting people where they are, that's what we're supposed to be doing now. So, and then, so we talk about this all the time too. The last thing is we're kind of playing in the sandbox of these big tech companies. Same thing is true for social media. Meta and Instagram can change the rules in a heartbeat, and there's, you
And they do,
but only so far as they let you up your audience. Same thing with Google here. So you can optimize for search and do all these things, but only so far as Google lets you. So my third tip here would be diversify outside of Google. So build your brand on other platforms where patients are going to spend some time. Maybe that's Instagram, maybe that's video there, maybe it's YouTube Shorts, maybe it's local community groups, maybe it's Reddit, direct email newsletters, those kinds of things to your existing patient database. All of that helps to diversify, so you're not just kind of putting all your eggs in one basket.
I think it sounds like do everything that we've been preaching for years, and as long as you've been building that foundation all along, sure, the targets changed a little, and the way that people are finding us is a little bit different. But if you've got that foundation, I think that we're gonna be fine. I think the biggest takeaway, it's pretty simple, and it's that your website is no longer the front door of the medical practice. It's now the search engine or Google. Consider your website more like the back office. And the thing is, if your strategy doesn't command attention on the search results page itself, you're now invisible to about 68% of the market. So where we've said create content, create good content, diversify, make sure that you're providing the answers to the questions that are getting asked, like do all the stuff that you've been doing. It's just the way people are finding us is just a little bit different this year than it was in the last couple of years.
Right. But everything that you've been doing kind of leads to that point. So if you have been doing the right things, you're still going to be in a great spot. You're still going to show up. It's just that the difference is people are now not clicking to the site, but that doesn't mean that they're not going to find you and they're not going to actually make that appointment. And if you want to know how your practice kind of looks to this sort of new zero-click patient, head over to our website and request a zero-click audit for the practice. We'd be happy to set that up and kind of talk through what that looks like. And then from there, we will let you know what our findings are and what our immediate suggestions are for how you can sort of combat this new wave of patients, conversions, AI, whatever you want to call it, but this new wave that we're all riding right now.
That's right. So with that, I'm Jennifer.
I'm Corey.
And we'll see you next time on the Dr. Marketing Tips Show. Thanks a bunch.
Thanks, guys.
More like this, hit like and subscribe so you'll always be alerted to new episodes when they come out. And if you want information about us, visit us over at insightmg.com. That's insightmg.com. We'll see you on the next episode.